everyone. My name is Trudy Poux. I'm 15, and I'm diagnosed with 2 learning disabilities and 1 attention disability. Oftentimes I'll be asked, what is it like to have ADHD? I like to think about it as being in a science class and trying to think about what the teacher is saying. Maybe we're talking about the force of a falling object or momentum, but suddenly that object is a race car. And suddenly, you're driving the race car, and it is so fun. Look at you go. And guess what? In the future, you have really cool hair. In fact, you won #1 hair in the world. And honestly, this is way more exciting than whatever the teacher was talking about. Wait, what is the teacher talking about? And suddenly, I missed everything they were saying. After getting diagnosed with learning and attention disabilities, I got an IEP. IEP stands for Individualized Education Plan, which is a document that contains suggestions to help teach a student and accommodations that should be made for the student in the classroom. These are all based off an evaluation that is conducted for the student, which then, after the evaluation, there's a CSE meeting. CSE stands for Committee on Special Education. This meeting will typically contain the student's parents or guardians, learning specialists, a teacher from the student's school, a person from the district who is qualified with learning disabilities, and a person from the district who can read the evaluation results, because sometimes it can look complicated. Now I had an IEP, which was designed to help me, but I had questions. What qualifies as a learning disability? Sure. According to Merriam-Webster, any of various conditions that interfere with an individual's ability to learn and so result in impaired functioning in language, reasoning, or academic skills. But is it common? Yes. In fact, 1 in 5 children are diagnosed with a learning disability. How are we preparing teachers for this? Are we preparing teachers for students with learning disabilities? No. In fact, only 17% of teachers feel that they could teach students with mild to moderate learning disabilities. Mild to moderate. 1 in 3 teachers feel that learning disabilities are caused by laziness. 1 in 4 teachers believe that ADD or ADHD is caused by bad parenting. Privilege. It is one of those words that leaves a bitter taste in your mouth. We don't talk about privilege nearly enough, but it is important to acknowledge it right now. I had the privilege to get diagnosed with learning and attention disabilities, which many students do not have. It takes advocating and present parents and guardians and a supportive household to get what you need in the classroom, which again, many students do not have. And let's say that the school or teacher violates your IEP that takes further support from your household to correct that, which many students do not have. So now I had an IEP, which was designed to help me, but I was wondering about the classification of learning disabilities. Learning disabilities are only classified by differences, not similarities, and often only talk about what students cannot do, not what they can do. Learning differences. This is another way to say learning disabilities, but somehow I always disliked this phrase because it somehow felt worse. The word difference felt isolating and reductive, like it was creating a separation between the learner who was typical and the learner who had learning disabilities. In fact, what is meant by difference? As stated before, at least 1 in 5 children have a learning disability. And this statistic is not even accurate because this is only going on a basis of diagnosis, not actual learning disabilities. In order to find the meaning of difference, I looked at different learning styles. These are in broad classification. There's the visual learner. They learn from bright colors, graphs, and visual representations. There's the kinesthetic learner. They learn from hands-on activities, exercise, and physical touch. There's the auditory learner. They learn from spoken instructions, discussion-based classes, and audiobooks. So anything auditorily. There's the reading and writing learner. They learn from interacting with books or texts and notes on lecture. They process information better as words. I next looked at learning environments. Now, in very broad classification, there are only two learning environments: the solitary learning environment and the stimulating learning environment. The solitary learning environment is silent, and ideally it has no distractions, while the stimulating learning environment is trying to activate as many senses in the learner as possible, whether this is chewing gum, or background noise, or music, or fidgeting with something. But keep in mind that since these are all very, very broad terms, many people are combinations of what has been previously stated. For example, I still like quiet in the background, but I still like chewing gum and listening to music because it helps me concentrate. But what happens when all of these different various learning needs are overlooked? Believe it or not, when students are not accommodated in the classroom or not prescribed medication for their learning, it can have long-term effects. We all develop study habits. These habits are heavily influenced by the motivation we feel to do our work and how challenging the work is for us personally. For example, if I was given an English project and the teacher was generous with me and accommodated me in all of my learning styles and the learning environments I needed, I would most likely understand the basics of what I needed to do for this project, and therefore, I would hopefully do well on it. In fact, I may even feel so encouraged that I may even want to go above and beyond. I may want to do extra because I feel the motivation to do so because I've been accommodated in the classroom, which is great. That's awesome. But what about classes where you're bored or challenged to a degree where it is easier to zone out and brush it off as I am just bad at this? This will not only affect your project grade, but this will affect all future topics that are related to this project. It will affect how you do in the future of this class and how you relate to future projects. And this reaction to work will become a habit, which is bad. Self-esteem in learning is also massively important. So the more self-esteem you have, the better a learner you are, oftentimes. If you are taught to work harder and do better and advocate for yourself when things get hard, suddenly the world becomes an easier place. But unfortunately, the educational system is not built around this philosophy, and therefore many students are not doing well, are not taught to do well, and the educational system is not there to support them. And the curricula and the teaching style is very limited in how much it wants to change. Which leads into lecturing. This is a very ordinary type of way of teaching classes, if not customary way. If any of you remember being in your science classes, you'll often remember that you had to lecture and you had to take notes, which can be very problematic for some students. In fact, in the 1970s, David Hessness was a teacher at Arizona State University. His classes were not doing well. The class average on tests was 40%, which is a failing grade. So he developed the FCI, Force Concept Inventory, with Ibrahim Haloun, which is a multiple choice test that you take before and after you take this class in order to test theoretically how well lecturing would work and how well his class was doing and if they were learning anything from being in his class. They tested this on 1,000 classes, and overall, their scores only went up by 14%. David Hessness was quoted later saying, "This theory of learning only seems to be working for about 10% of the students." And I think the evidence indicates that these 10% are the 10% of students that would do well even without the instructor. This is why it is unrealistic to expect students to sit in class and take notes and listen vigorously for 6 hours a day. So this led me to think, what is the ideal learner? Because after looking over different learning styles and categories, I had this question in my mind. What is the ideal learner? There's a whole system built around the ideal learner. So what is it? There's not an ideal learner. After conspiring for quite some time, I found a big problem in the system. In fact, possibly the biggest problem in the system. The educational system, when testing a learner for learning disabilities, they have a standardized score that they compare their evaluation to. However, if there is no ideal learner, which is what I found, there is no reason to be doing this, except why don't we just start accommodating students in class without having to get diagnosed? Why do I have to be diagnosed as if I have an illness for my learning needs to be met? Because looking back on getting an IEP and getting diagnosed with learning and attention disabilities, I felt validated because I finally was starting to get what I needed in classes and I was able to get medication. But I realized if that's the key to what I need, that's not the right answer because it isn't accessible. When a student is diagnosed with learning and attention disabilities, a student is ostracized. When separated from a class setting that by default is against people with learning differences and disabilities, a student is put down and taken away from that setting and isolated. Oftentimes, students and teachers will view that student as different or broken. If you do not believe me, I have heard the word retard used in many conversations I have had, constantly. In fact, 90% of teens and adults have heard the R word used in conversations they have had. We should start building a system that is based around inclusivity. We should be changing curricula and teaching styles built around the student's needs. 56% of teachers think that IEPs help students because what an IEP does is it helps keep the system in place. It helps keeping teachers to teach students the same thing in the same way, even if you have a learning disability, with a little bit of extra help, maybe 10 minutes more on a test, or maybe you get notes in a lecture where you're still getting taught the same thing the same way. We need to be teaching the same thing in different ways. We need to be using ideas and teaching concepts that are adaptable for everyone. We need to be finding motivated teachers who can make a change. We need to be educating ourselves and others about the importance of in-classroom inclusion. And most importantly, question the system, question solutions, question labels, question ideas, question everything. Thank you.